So we are going to continue in the book of Judges today. If you're following along, we've made it to Judges chapter 14 now. Judges chapter 14, we're now into the life of Samson. But before we get started there, we're actually going to be, and Hannah will see this when she gets there, we're actually going to go to the book of Numbers first. And the reason I want to go to the book of Numbers first is because I kind of referenced it last week, but I want us to read what the word says about the Nazirite vow. So Numbers chapter 6, we're going to look at verses 1 through 8, where it says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses." Mine might be a little different, by the way. I'm reading out of ESV, but it'll be up there. "So the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, 'Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when either a man or a woman makes a special vow, the vow of a Nazirite, to separate himself to the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink. He shall have no vinegar made from wine or strong drink, and shall not drink any juice of grapes or eat grapes, fresh or dried. All the days of his separation he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, not even the seeds or the skins.'" Okay, so this is important. Just because if you remember, one of the instructions that was given to I can't say her name because her name isn't there, to Samson's mom, is you can't have any product of the grapevine. Now, why is this? Why is this? Because if you remember, he was dedicated not from, as we normally say, birth to death. He was dedicated from the womb to death. So if that's not a pro-life argument, I don't know what is. And then, so even when he was in the womb, he had to fulfill this vow. And so his mother actually ended up having to take part of this vow, so she couldn't have any products of the grapevine even while she was pregnant. And then it's also said, all the days of his vow, which of course is the entire course of his life, the vow of separation, no razor shall touch his head until the time that is completed, which he separates himself to the Lord. And he shall be holy, and he shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow long. Okay? Now, what's interesting about that is it goes from saying man or woman may make this vow to using purely masculine language here, right? It says his. That's because it's a cultural norm, isn't it, for a woman to have longer hair than a man. So the point is, look, he's not supposed to touch a razor to his head, so clearly he's going to look a bit different than the other men of his culture, right? Whereas if a woman just let her hair grow out a little longer, not too many people would even notice. Like, we notice when girls get their hairs cut, not so much when they let it grow out because it takes time. And finally, all the days he separates himself from the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body, not even for his father or his mother, for his brother or sister. If they die, he shall make himself unclean because of his separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation, he is to be holy to the Lord. Okay, so from the time of the womb, this has to take place. And of course, some of these things are easier than others, right? Not shaving a baby's head is real easy when it's in the womb, so doesn't got to worry about that. And of course, not being near a dead body, most people don't want to be anyway, but of course, when we often take special care of pregnant women because they have that baby inside of them, and so we don't usually allow them to, we wouldn't want them to go into that circumstance anyway where they would be near dead bodies. Plus, if you remember, we talked about this last week, this is a time of evil where they've given into idol worship once again, but these two seem to be still devout and worshiping God, and one of the things in order to remain holy and clean before the Lord was to avoid being around and touching dead bodies, and so this was already something that they would have been practicing. Okay, so of that, we have the three main rules, okay? So, and then it goes on to give you some special circumstances and stuff like that. If you want to read the rest of the vow, you can later in number 6. But I wanted to hit those three rules because those are the three main rules of being a Nazirite. So you don't have any products of the grapevine. That means no drinking, no eating the seed, skin, stuff like that. You can't cut your hair, and don't touch or be near a dead body. Now, many of you have probably seen a lot of different images of Samson, and they make him big and buff, and he's got long hair, but he usually has some pretty trim facial hair, doesn't it? Yeah, he does, but it says, no razor shall touch your head at all, right? That includes your beard. So I've had to re-envision Samson in my brain as kind of more looking like a wizard, like a giant buff wizard with this huge long beard. Can you imagine we're going to be reading here about the life of Samson. He, from the moment of the womb till he becomes an older man, because he judges Israel for over 20 years, right? By the time he dies, he's an old man, and he must have one heck of a beard. Okay, that's all I want to say. Okay, so all of that to say, there are some preconceived notions and stuff like that, and it does actually help to illustrate some of the things that are going to come up later, and especially with this vow, because there's some things that get brought up, and I think that were strange, but if we understand the vow, it kind of helps explain, oh, okay, this is why. Because Samuel doesn't feel the need to explain to his Jewish audience that's reading this, hey, this is what's going on, because that's just normal, right? Why we don't write about normal things when we're writing to other people. Right? Because it's assumed that we understand. Okay, so let's go to Judges chapter 14. Judges chapter 14, verse 1. And it says, Samson, okay, so if you remember, he's a young man now, and it said even as a young man, there was signs that the Holy Spirit was with him, that God was with him, and some amazing things were going on. And so we assume at this point he's at least a young man, whether he's in his 20s or 30s, unsure, probably closer to his 30s, because it would have been more customarily appropriate for him to be in his 30s by the time he goes to get married. It says, Samson went down to Timnah, there saw a young Philistine woman. And when he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now go get her for me as my wife. And of course, this was, culturally appropriate, right? This is how this was done. Your father went and negotiated with her father in order to negotiate a bride price in order that the daughter of, or the wife in this case, would be appropriately taken care of, right? She had a bride price associated with her, so let's say the man mistreated her, she needed to leave for whatever reason, the bride price was there so that she could be taken care of in the event that he was no longer able to care for her. Anyway, so this is totally normal. And his father and mother replied, isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives and or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? Now, I've read this with some people, and they go, relatives? Ew. But you got to remember, first off, what he's talking about. When he says relatives, he means one of the people of Israel. Also, it was less of a taboo, shall we say, right? They definitely had, if you read in the book of Levi, there was definitely relations that were prohibited, including very close relations, but you could still marry. I think it was even your cousin was allowed. So we're in a culturally different time as well. So it's not that strange for Samuel to be writing this, or that strange for his father to be asking this. Not only that, as I said before, the father is a devout believer in God. And a devout believer in God would know that God said, do not intermarry with the people that live in this land. Because he knew that it would mean they were going to bring in false idols into their home. That it was going to introduce all of the idolatry that has been going on. And it will instead actually ruin them. And so this is actually his father doing a good thing, right? His father's doing a good thing. He's looking out for his son. He's looking out for his grandchildren because he wants to make sure that his grandchildren are brought up right and they're not brought up by a pagan mother. But it says, but Samson said to his father, get her for me. She is the right one for me. And his parents, and so we of course have the benefit of knowing his parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines throughout this time they were ruling over Israel. You'll notice throughout the whole book of Judges, we've read about people that oppressed Israel or demanded tribute even, but never have they ruled over Israel like this, right? Moab would show up and just take their stuff, right? So they lived in fear and they tried to hide their stuff and keep it away, but Moab wasn't there as a ruling state. This is different. When the Philistines showed up, they showed up and they planted roots and they said, no, we're staying, and this is ours now. And they began to take over. They began to rule Israel, all of Israel, not just plunder them for their goods as they had experienced in the past. This was a different kind of oppression. It says in verse 5, Samson then went down to Timnah together with his father and mother, right? He's going down because he wants to get this girl. She's a pretty girl, and he likes her, and so, hey, I'm interested. Let's go down and get her. Now, and it says, as they approached the vineyards from Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring towards him. Actually, we'll get to that after. Okay, suddenly a young lion comes toward him. And then it says, the Spirit of the Lord, good, interesting phrase, pay attention, came powerfully upon him, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands as he might have a young goat. Now, all of us have refrigerators at home? Okay, some of us do. Some of us are still thinking about it. It's a worthwhile investment. You should get a fridge. But before we had refrigerators, you had to keep the animals alive as long as possible because we couldn't keep the meat fresh. So it would have been very common practice to be able, okay, we're hungry, it's time to eat. Okay, send Samson out to go kill the goat, please. We need him to prepare it for dinner. So it would have actually been quite common. And so we read it now, and it kind of seems like a really strange thing to say, as easily as he tore open a goat. But this would have been understood like, oh yeah, like that's just what you do. When you're hungry, yep, you slaughter the goat, and you have to tear the flesh, and you have to prepare it for a meal, right? And obviously, when you do something repetitively, it becomes easier and easier, right? You get stronger and stronger, and so this would have been a normal task of daily life. But a lion, on the other hand, is not a goat. A lion is much bigger. And I was hoping Rebecca would be up here, but she's not. But I'm going to tell her story anyway. So I took Rebecca, I'll never forget this for as long as I lived. A normal reaction to a lion, as when I took Rebecca down to Jungle Cat World on 35. I took her and Claire there when Claire was quite young. And we got there early in the morning, and so a lot of the cats were still sleeping. And so we get there, and she's looking around. She's like, where is it? Like, there's supposed to be a lion here. I don't see the lion. Well, off on the right is like the little den area where it sleeps. So I kind of knew, okay, the lion's over there. She wasn't really paying attention. Then suddenly, bounding out of the thing, comes this huge lion towards Rebecca because she's right up close to the fence, looking, where is it? I can't see it. Vroom, huge lion comes leaping out, freaks her out, she's screaming. Normal reaction. This is how humans react when a giant murderous cat comes at us, okay? This is normal. Samson, on the other hand, does something completely abnormal. Right? And I feel like the writer Samuel, he kind of goes right past it, and it's mostly because he's got a bigger story to tell, but how incredible is it? Like, we just see that the Spirit of the Lord truly was over him because he just does something completely inhuman. Not only is he able to kill this beast with his bare hands, but he doesn't have a normal human reaction. It's just the Lord comes upon him, and something supernatural occurs. This is going to be important later on. But it said, and so this is what's interesting. I thought, okay, I don't know how they were going down to Timnah. Maybe he sent his parents off ahead of him, or maybe they were falling behind. I don't know. Obviously, they're not there because it says he told neither his father or his mother what he had done. So they weren't around. He was by himself. Lion comes at him, and he's, unlike, just like the Hulk, I guess, looks over with his big wizard beard and just rips this lion apart. Okay. And then he went down to talk with the woman, and he liked her. It's a good start to any marriage, right? It's good to at least like your wife. So it's a good start. It says sometime later when he went back to marry her, so we don't know how much time, but he went down, they had this negotiation, he goes back home, and now he's headed back to go marry her. It says he turns aside and he looked at the lion's carcass. So the lion he had there he killed was still there, and in it he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. So he scooped out the honey with his hands and he ate as he went along. And when he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they ate it too. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Weird situation. First off, I didn't even know bees would make a hive inside of the carcass of a lion, but maybe this is an Israeli bee thing. I don't know. But it's always been, and I always found that was really strange too. Outside of the riddle that's about to come up, I never really understood the whole point. Why was Samuel making a big deal about this? And then I went back and I revisited. Wait a minute. What did the Numbers chapter 6 say about the vow? And if you actually continue on, it says if someone even suddenly dies in your presence, this is also a big deal, right? Well, if you know the story of Samson, if you don't, spoiler, here it comes. It's a really old story, so it's your own fault for not reading it. If you don't know, Samson kills a lot of people. He's around a lot of dead bodies. This vow is getting broken time and time and time again. Okay? And even here, he goes up to this dead body. Not only does he go near it, he even touches it and gets the honey. I think this is interesting because oftentimes we just go, oh, it's because he cut his hair. It seems like more than that was going on throughout this thing. But it also shows us that sometimes things aren't so black and white either. It says his father went down to see, verse 10. Now his father went down to see the woman, and there Samson held a feast, as was customary for the young men. And when the people saw him, they chose, so by the way, he went down to see the woman. They're getting married. This is the wedding, okay? And he holds this big feast for the young men, and it says they chose 30 men to be his companions. And he said, let me tell you a riddle, Samson said, and if you can give me an answer within 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Now, I don't know if you've ever played a riddle game with your friends, but usually we say, and you only get so many guesses. He gives them 7 days. Unlimited guesses. I would just be spouting out nonsense at this point. But what was the hook? Why did they want to do it? I'll give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes, and if you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Now, why is this important? Well, now we live in a time of textile factories and cheap clothes. Not then. You had 1, maybe 2 sets of clothes if you were doing well, okay? And you took care of that. You darned every hole. You fixed it. You mended it. You patched it. You did whatever you could to keep that good. So this prize, I get a whole new set of clothes? That's a pretty good, this is worth the gamble. Right? And what do we have? We got 7 days, unlimited guesses. Yeah, of course I'm going to take this deal. How hard could this riddle really be? So what is the riddle? He says, tell us your riddle, let's hear it. And he replied, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. And for 3 days, they could not give an answer. Now, we, of course, let's be honest. If you heard that riddle and hadn't read the story about the lion, what do you think about this at this point? It makes sense why for 3 days they don't get anywhere. But then it says on the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, these are terrible people, okay? And this is going to be made very apparent. They go up to his wife and say, coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's house to death. Did you invite us here to steal our property? That's quite the threat. Where we come from, that's illegal. But I think this is where Samson's wife actually makes herself a huge mistake. She had an opportunity here to do the right thing, but she doesn't. Instead, she says, then Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, you hate me, you don't really love me, you've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. And he says, I haven't explained it to my father or mother, he replied, so why should I explain it to you? She cried for the whole 7 days of the feast. So on the 7th day, he finally told her, because, man, you imagine that? You just get married and your wife's just crying for the first 7 days? It's like, this is not a good start. I may like you, but this is not a good start. But she continued to press him, so in turn he explained she cried the whole 7 days, so on the 7th day he finally told her, and because she continued to press him, so she in turn explained the riddle to her people. This is what I mean by she did the wrong thing, right? She got a big threat. Do I understand why she did what she did? Absolutely. But here's the other option. Samson, these men have threatened me. They're going to kill me and my family. They're going to destroy us all. What are we going to do? They want to know the answer, right? Why didn't she just tell him the truth? But instead she chose to deceive him. Do you see what I'm getting at? Sometimes we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place, but at the end of the day, we're still being forced to make a choice. So sometimes we got to make sure, like when we're in those difficult situations, right? Because I'm not going to pretend this isn't a difficult situation. It is. This is a horrible situation to be in. I can't imagine being in this situation. But at the same time, I know that there is a right way and a wrong way to respond. And this was her mistake. Instead of going to her husband and explaining it to him, she instead, and in all fairness to her, at this point, they still don't realize like quite who Samson is. Samson hasn't had any great triumphs yet. Like he hasn't had any good, like this is just kind of the beginning of his story, right? He's off to get married. No one really knows what's going on. And no one knows that he killed a lion with his bare hands. So before sunset on the seventh day, the men of the town said to him, "What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion?" So then Samson said to them, I still don't understand this. I have looked at this over and over again. And this is the biggest I've seen Brent smile. "If you have not plowed my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." The reason I say it like that is because obviously in a 21st century context, that has a very specific meaning. I don't think that is quite the same meaning, but we do know, first off, he is referring to his wife as a female cow. Do with that what you will. I don't know quite what they're getting at there, whether they're just, they're talking about like the aggressive behavior of, because if you think about it, if you go out and plow a field, that's not exactly passive behavior, right? Like you're literally ripping up the earth and tearing it apart. So I'm not 100% as to what exactly he meant by that, but what we do know for certain is that he recognizes it is his wife that sold him out. It is his and it's because they went after his wife. They and that she had ultimately betrayed him. And then this next point is interesting, and it's because I went ahead and I wanted to look at the entire story of Samson altogether, because this phrase right here, and it says, "And then the Spirit of the Lord," you recognize that. We read about that. When the lion comes at him, it says, "And then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him." And here we read it again. "The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. And he went down to Ashkelon," another Philistine city, "and he struck down 30 of their men." Of course, and then he stripped them of everything and gave their clothes to those who explained the riddle. He goes and he essentially kills more Philistines. And then burning with anger, he returned to his father's home. And this is going to be more important for next week than this week, but it says, "And then Samson's wife was given to one of his companions who had attended him at the feast." Now, did it say that Samson didn't want to have his wife anymore? No, it said he liked her. He's just mad. And he went home. He's like, I'm done. Like, he's upset. But then his wife is given away. As I said, this is going and not by him, not by Samson. This is not an annulment. This is not a divorce. This is going to become more apparent next week. But this is, of course, because God knew the reaction, not only that this whole marriage to begin with was going to cause a confrontation with the Philistines, but he knew that even after this confrontation, it would lead to another and another and another. This was the event that set off a chain of events that will allow Samson to become the judge that we read about and the judge that we know so well. And God knew exactly what was going on. And so here we have it. This is the beginning of Samson's story, and the only reason I don't want to go any further is because chapter 15 is wild on its own. And if you haven't read the story of Samson, go home, read the whole thing. You'll just be like, I understand why this can't be made into a movie. Okay, this is a crazy, crazy story. But one of the things that I loved about this was it talks about the Spirit of the Lord, right? The Holy Spirit keeps showing up, and then Samson is able to do superhuman feats, right? He fights 30 men and kills them. and then steals all their stuff. And then he fought a lion with his bare hands. And evidently, without a scratch, because you would think if you got in a big tussle and you got all scratched up, by the time you get there, your family would be like, whoa, what happened to you? But no one seems completely fazed by what happened. When God shows up, amazing things, superhuman things can happen. I was thinking about this while we were, even while we were practicing the song this morning where we were singing, "Come, now is the time to worship." And I thought, why do we worship? Why do we worship God? Because when God shows up, incredible things happen. And you know what's even better? This Holy Spirit that comes upon Samson, right? This Holy Spirit that we keep reading about who shows up and helps these judges do amazing things is the same Holy Spirit that was given to us as an advocate on that first day of Pentecost after Jesus rose from the dead. It's the same Holy Spirit that is in us today. So we are just as capable of God using us to do amazing things. The difference is, are we willing to be used in incredible ways to allow God to do incredible things through us? Right? And if you're wondering, well, yeah, but this is a special circumstance. Look at Samson. Well, look at Peter. Peter served and he raised people from the dead. Paul, who went around killing and arresting Christians, became saved, and then he resurrected people from the dead. It's not out of our reach. But if we had faith the size of a mustard seed, we could move mountains. Not because of our strength, but because of the strength of the Holy Spirit that is within us. And we see that here in this story. And we're going to see it continue as we go through the life of Samson. So as we, and with that in mind, you know, that is the God that we're praying to. That is the God that we call on when we come to him in prayer. And so if there's anything that you want prayer for, or anything that, you know, what's going on and you're not sure what's going on, or how we're going to get through this, or how, you know, how we're going to see this through, and you want to give it to God, then give it to God right now, because God can do the impossible. And he's willing and he wants to be there with us. Because if he didn't, he wouldn't have sent his son.